Thanks for sticking with us through the afternoon. So it's the Office of New Urban Mechanics, and I want to know, is the mechanics like the structures and mechanisms, or is it like the people?
It's both. Yeah, from the very beginning, the idea for New Urban Mechanics came from our previous mayor, Mayor Tom Menino. He got the nickname the Urban Mechanic because of his focus on the built issues in the environment. But we've always treated the mechanics in both of the ways. The mechanics of the people and both of the systems that they interact with.
Huh. So you have a couple of dozen projects working design and technology into these different areas of city government. Give us like one big success and one big failure among all these different experiments.
So one of our first big successes, not only for us but for the city, was back in 2007. We were looking at overhauling the way in which local government can collaborate with the public. And so we had the thought of, for many years, we had been running a mayor's hotline, 617-635-4500 is the number. We had overhauled it, on the back end so that, it was sort of, we tracked all the data, everything that came in. And we had the thought of, why don't we build an app that, as a front end, right? You can call in and you can still do that, but what if there was an app that would work? And so, this was 2007, 2008, and the iPhone 3G had just come out. And our thought was, is there a way to build a best of breed user experience through the app into the system, right? Because usually people are very used to like government systems being very parochial and very ugly. And so the thought was that why don't we build something that was elegant to use, that people would want to use, that we could encourage new kinds of civic behavior. So I think that was a big success for us along many different dimensions. Yeah. And the big part of that work was paying attention to how people use this new channel to interact with us. And we got lots of ideas, some good and some bad. And so one of the ideas that we thought would work, but that didn't really work, was the ability just to text things in, right? Because the thought was, like, you couldn't do any simpler than the ability just to, I see a dead rat on the corner of such and such. But when we tested it out, and we did a bunch of beta testing, it was just too easy to get it wrong. Whether it's spelling mistakes or not enough information, it was just there are too many variations to make that useful to the people that have to actually go out and fix it. So that never really worked.
Huh. So your time at the Urban Mechanics office has spanned kind of 2010 to now. It's kind of the period in which a lot of different technologies, mobile technologies, got mainstreamed. How have you seen both the city's relationship to technology as well as just like the citizens of the city? How have you seen that relationship change?
So certainly, I think as consumer electronics and digital tools have become more commonplace, and like more and more people have used them since 2010, and it's like in more sectors of society, right? So it's not just your high-end income wage earners, but even people of very modest means. Even homeless people have smartphones nowadays. Excuse me. That has changed their level. I think it has changed their level of expectation from us, right? So I think that it put us in the hot seat of realizing that we can no longer continue to provide these old services in the old ways in which we did that, and just hope that people will be happy with that. People, they can order anything they want from Amazon. So why can't they do that from a local government service? That was the world in which we had to adapt ourselves. And so we had to rethink how we deliver those services, what are the channels that we use to deliver them, and so on.
But it also seems like the technology has kind of melted into the background a little bit too. And what's come to the fore for you all is that you need to redesign services, not just sort of put some technology on it.
Right. Right. That's definitely, we started out doing lots of technology things back in the day, but what we began to find was, like, when we think about like what makes those things interesting, it is the design decisions that we make about, putting something here or emphasizing something. A good design can encourage new kinds of civic behavior, right? And so that's what we were hoping for, and that's what we were looking for. And so we began to realize that our real job is not so much technology. It is about thinking about design, thinking about, like, how do we put the user, the human, at the center of everything that we do, and really to rethink of ourselves as sort of like a design team inside of local government.
A few years back, you gave an interview, and you said, the interview asked, like, well, have you gotten any pushback on the different things that you've done in the city? And you said, no, not really. And I was thinking, like, shouldn't you have gotten pushback? Like, shouldn't some of the things that you've worked on have gotten people to say, no, I don't want this? And has that changed over the last few years? Have there been things where the community has come back and you've had to reconfigure the product or service that you were trying to put out?
So the issue for us is not, let me think about this. I don't think the issue for us really is pushback, because it's really one of use, right? So, and you can call that a kind of pushback. But the issue for us, like, we start all of our work by understanding real human needs and using that as the input to determine what we do, right? So we're not building things and then just pushing it out. That instead we're listening to what the issues people are facing and how they're living their lives and what they're frustrated with, and is there something that we can do to be responsive to that? That's really where we start. So our hope is, by taking this kind of very people-centric approach, that we're starting out doing a good thing. Maybe we don't do a good job of delivery, maybe it's bad design or something, but the issue for us is usually more about people aren't using whatever the thing is, whatever it happens to be, and that's for many reasons. Maybe they don't know about it. That's another big issue in local government. There isn't very good channels to get the word out. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think when a lot of, certainly in the Bay, like when you think about technology in the city, it's all of these things that are being deployed onto the city. Whether it's like the scooters, which have caused like a big uproar in the city, or Airbnbs driving up rent, or other things. How do you, because you guys are also supposed to serve as kind of a central point in the government for startups to come into the city, right?
Yeah.
So how have those discussions changed since like the times when Uber would just deploy into a city?
So I think in the early days, so this is maybe going back maybe 10 years or so, I think we were often seen in an adversarial tone, right? That we were there to shut things down, or we're just the regulators or something. But over the last many years, the tone has changed. I think people now see us more in the role of collaborator or partner than as just a regulator. So the way that we think about this in urban mechanics is that we want to hear from these new companies because we want to engage in experiment. We have the same interest that they do. They want to see if their service or whatever it is going to be successful in the city, and so do we. And we want to understand.
Oh, thanks.
And we want to understand if it's providing a valuable service to the public, how can we do more of that, or how can we grow it if possible? So that's the way we think a lot about experimentation and prototyping with this work.
So how do you think about the scooter deployments that you've seen? Like, how would you go about redesigning the way that scooters have come into cities?
Good question. So I don't have a great answer for you, but I do think that there's an opportunity here to take a deeper dive into various communities around the city to understand what their challenges are. So Boston, like a lot of cities, are kind of unique for us. We haven't had a strategic plan since the 60s, right? We haven't had any kind of a plan. And so one of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of years under Mayor Walsh's leadership is to do planning, community-wide planning. It's called Imagine Boston 2030. So imagining the future of the city together. And a big part of that is transportation or mobility. And so, through that process, the transportation part was called Go Boston. We heard lots of really interesting stories about the frustrations that people have getting around the city. And I think that if these companies come to us and we can talk about what we've heard from these different neighborhoods, we can actually help them deploy in a more targeted way rather than just spamming the city. I think there's a way to get these things out there. As much as they're providing a service to people, they're also angering people, right? They're sort of on sidewalks and all kinds of things, right? So I think there's a smarter way that we can deploy these things in such a way that these companies can understand, do people want to use this? And you can also solve a problem that several communities have, and the local government understands. We get a little bit of a breather to figure out how and if we want to regulate this.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things I've noticed, 20th century urban history is like a lot of local government misadventures seem to come when quantitative data becomes super dominant and people sort of ignore a lot of the kind of ethnographic research that your team does. How do you make those more qualitative things count in the same way within local government when people so often want
they just want the numbers
quantified? They want the numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think we still struggle with that, but I think you know, developing a qualitative understanding of a problem gives you new insight. I mean, numbers give you insight as well, but it gives you a human scale impact about how your behavior would change, and the way that this would impact your mental well-being and those kinds of things. Those are the things that are much harder to get when you take a very hard-edged quantitative approach. So I think that there's at the same time, I don't think, you know, we have to go completely anecdotal like the old, you know, government or politicians kind of, my gut tells me people will hate this. I think that's not good either. But I think there is a middle ground where we can use the insights that we get from direct interaction with people and do something with that, right? And combine that with the numbers to figure out how we're going to grow these neighborhoods and do that in a more thoughtful way.
Yeah. We have time for one question. If somebody has one. I have this. Oh, yeah. Hold on, let me try this out because I'm going to be doing this in the next section.
Hello. Hi, my name's Connor. I'm a designer. Super excited to hear about all the experimentation. Great, awesome. What kind of problems has your team been struggled the most with trying to create or change behaviors around the city?
Most. So I have a litany of problems. I think it is really, and it kind of changes from year to year, you know. So, you know, every few years we get a new crop of people doing different jobs. You know, I think the biggest problem is a failure of the imagination. You know, when people assume that something just isn't possible, it's not possible to do that, when it's really just a question of this, like, let's just rethink this a bit, and we can come to a new approach that will work. And so that's really just imagination. Like, so people need to be inspired that change is possible. If you're used to working in a big organization and it's always worked the same way and you've never seen it work another way, you can't imagine it working in a different way. But as soon as someone turns on the lights and you can say, oh, there is a different way to do it, and you don't have to reinvent everything. Sometimes it's just a very small thing. I think that you know, doing things to inspire the imagination is the biggest challenge.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nigel. We're out of time. Thanks.
Thanks very much.